welcome back. So today I thought I would talk a little bit about how you can educate young men if you have kids, are planning to have kids, or know you want to have kids in the future. And obviously I'm not going to give you a ton of direct specific answers because I am going to say I don't have the answers because I don't know. I don't have like three specific things that would just turn your young boys into men. But I have some ideas. And I think there's some good reasons to talk about this, to talk about why we need to properly educate young men because the education system isn't doing it. And it's definitely not going to turn out any great men. None, not at all. You know, one thing that John Taylor Gatto talked about, and he was a school teacher, he's dead now, but he talked about how school just makes factory workers. You're all the exact same, and you're not treated any different. Everyone is treated the exact same, taught the same thing, in the same order. Nothing's different for anyone. And I would recommend that you guys go read his books. I read his book, Dumbing Us Down, which was fantastic. And I actually made a video about him, which I can put up on screen. I would recommend watching that video. I also, in one of the past videos I did, I think it was 3 videos ago, I talked about how schooling was started in the US, in Massachusetts. And that story actually came from John Taylor Gatto. So I think you should also check that last video out. But I think it's important that we look back at great men and see how they were educated and exactly how little schooling they had. For example, Thomas Jefferson, by the age of 13 years old, was running a 2,500 acre farm alone, because both of his parents had died, with 250 employees. That doesn't seem like something a 13-year-old would ever do today. Or how about George Washington? He didn't go to school until he was 11, and the first thing he studied was trigonometry. He then became a crackerjack surveyor, which crackerjack meaning someone of marked excellence, by the time he was 13, and by the time he was 17, he was the official surveyor for Culpeper County, Virginia. Or how about Admiral Dewey, who was the first American admiral who sailed a warship from Peru to Boston in 1815, and it was a captured British warship. He was 12 years old, and he was the captain of that warship. He had 2 guns on, and when the British captain appeared above deck, he told him, "Sir," he said, "you'll be dead if you do that again," and thrown over the side. So you think about this, and these are 12-year-olds, 11-year-olds, 13-year-olds, great men who had very little schooling, but actually had real-world experience. And at the time in America, most of the schooling, or when schooling started in America, it wasn't all bad, and most of the education was based off of learning about morals and ethics. And I think that a lot of people would shame that today and go, well, they're not actually learning anything, but that's the exact opposite. Think about what those people did in America from the founding of America to the Industrial Revolution. Think about that and what all those people did. Lots of great men produced during that time. And then you think about now. How many great men are produced? How many men today, or young men, can you look at and go, I think he's got something? Basically none. And, you know, it's not like great men are going to be found everywhere. They're certainly not common. They're rare. But still, you should be able to see some. My last example is Thomas Edison. And he had a newspaper business by the time he was 12 years old. He was reporting the news on the Civil War to people traveling on long-distance trains. He had access to a telegraph and was the first to get the news. And he sold each paper for a dime to a quarter. Sometimes he would sell 1,000 copies at a stop, meaning he would make more in an hour than most working adult men would make in several months. Doesn't that seem crazy? Another 12-year-old doing that. Again, you wouldn't see that today, and a lot of that is because of all the laws and regulations. But that's also because people are not well educated. I think if people were well educated and knew exactly about what laws are in place and how they commit an average of 3 felonies a day just by existing and doing things that they would think is normal, they're a felon. But people don't know that because they are not well educated. So I think, first of all, teaching your boys that they are committing 3 felonies a day by doing basically what normal people do is a thing that happens. I also think that if you want to educate young boys, then, especially if they're interested in history, then you should have them watch the Tom Woods Liberty Classroom videos, because they are very informative. I did 3 or 4 courses on there, and I learned a lot, learned very much, and took a lot of notes. And it's real, actual history, and history that is not taught in schools at all, about different historical figures, historical events that nobody talks about, nobody knows, and about different authors, American authors, which I feel like if you're an American, you should know about American history. So why is American history, besides the Civil War, World War I, World War II, women's suffrage, and MLK, those are basically the main things taught in school that are part of American history, but even a lot of those events are lied about or just completely biased, which can mean the same thing. But like I said, as Americans, shouldn't you know about American history? But most Americans don't, and that's something you should know. That's something, if you're growing up in America, a young boy growing up in America should know the history about America. Or in Canada, if you're growing up in Canada, you should know about the history of Canada. Because I think it's important for young men to know where they came from and who brought them there, and who allows them to have what they have and be where they are, and what those people in the past did. I mean, for example, one of my ancestors is John Howland, and he's famous for falling off the Mayflower and surviving during a storm by grabbing onto a rope. And he was a indentured servant. And then when he got to the colonies with his, I guess, master, they survived 2 winters, and then his master and his master's wife died, and then he met some woman that was also on the Mayflower, and they got married, and they survived the winters, and they went on and built a life in the colonies. So I think it's important to know things like that. I feel like I'm also lucky that it's a more popular thing, or his story is more popular than most people's stories. But I feel like even little things like that are important to know. Not all boys are interested in history, but I feel like most are, and history is important because you can combine history with lots of different subjects. Reading, writing, science, math even. And it's interesting to think about why they don't teach that in schools. Like, why is the history, besides Pilgrims, that's basically about it, or all that's taught about the founding of America in schools, why isn't the rest of the history of the founding of America taught? I mean, they'd never go into detail if they do teach it. Not at all. So, I think that's strange. And I think that's why you should homeschool your kids. But anyway, if you guys have any other suggestions about what parents or anyone else who believes that they will have kids in the future, for what they can do to properly educate their boys, then please leave a comment down below. Hopefully we could compile a list of even 5 things that young boys should learn before they're 18, let's say. Because I think that's what we need nowadays. Since we aren't seeing many potential great men at all, and there's very few great men in the world, then we need to help create more. So thank you guys very much for watching, and I hope you learned a little bit more about George Washington, Thomas Edison, Admiral Dewey, and Thomas Jefferson, because I didn't know any of those things until John Taylor Gatto, so I think he was very interesting to learn that they did those things at such a young age and without schooling. So I think it's pretty awesome. But thank you guys very much, and I'll see you guys next time.